Hi everyone, and a warm welcome to Tomorrow's Tech Today, bringing you the latest in technology, talent, transformational change, and of course, tech as a force for good. I'm your host, Professor Sally Eaves, and today we're discussing all things actualization when it comes to enabling sustainability impact that scales. With multiple vectors of change, both positive and sometimes challenging, in this episode we place a focus on ESG measurement and from the network up. To do this, I'm delighted to be joined by the brilliant Sarwar Khan, Global Head of Digital Sustainability at BT Group. We dive into all the latest innovation in this space, including BT Group's launch of a carbon network dashboard and digital carbon calculator. I personally believe these can contribute to advancing ESG measurement that is consistent, holistic, and comparable. Ultimately, it's the move from ESG transparency to accountability too. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to the show, Sarwar. Wonderful to speak to you today.
Thank you, Sally. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier on today. I'd love to kind of share with the audience a little bit more about your background as our place to start, if that's okay. I always think, sharing that personal journey to your role, particularly moments that matters along the way, it can just be super encouraging for other people. So maybe that's kind of a place to start, the person behind the tech, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at BT now for just over 3 years. I've been in the sustainability role for 13 months or so. Prior to that, I was in strategy. Sustainability was a part of the work I did in strategy. But before joining BTS, I had around 10 to 11 years working in the energy industry. So working for brands such as E.ON and SSE. For E.ON, actually going all the way back, I joined the graduate scheme in 2010. So fresh out of university, and the first placement I actually did in my E.ON career was in a power station, a coal-fired power station. To be specific, for those who know it, Ratcliffe Power Station in Nottingham. I did 6 months there, getting a real experience of the engineering aspects and the role of fossil fuels in terms of driving our energy system. And then from there, I did a number of other placements, one in public affairs, looking at working with government, developing policies. And from there, moved on into Sweden, actually, where I lived and worked for E.ON, looking at business models for developing and operating onshore and offshore wind farms across the Nordics. And while I was there, I also completed my master's in renewable energy at Loughborough University. I moved beyond that into consulting. We set up a new function within E.ON to look at new energy solutions. So I was developing propositions that looked at helping consumers and small businesses and medium-sized enterprises with diversifying and moving into distributed energy solutions such as solar PV, heat pumps, batteries, and electric vehicle chargers. All the stuff we're talking about today,
Absolutely.
I was looking at around 2012, 2013. So I did that for a while, and then I moved into SSE, coming back to the UK in Reading, and there I was developing propositions for their connected home team. So very much looking at the opportunity, the commercial opportunity associated with smart metering. So for those who are familiar with smart metering, they'll know it's a regulated rollout. But beyond that, there's an opportunity to provide data and insights to both consumers and small businesses, and I was predominantly looking at how we monetize that as a service effectively. And then I guess the moment that matters for me probably came around 2 years ago. Like many others, I welcomed to the world my son, who's just a little over 2 years ago, and for me that was a pivotal moment because he inspired me effectively to look for doing something with purpose and leaving a positive impact on the world, and making sure I played a role in terms of the future society. I guess it was coincidental and perfect that I was in an organization in BT that leads with purpose. Our purpose in BT is to connect for good, and it runs all the way through the organization. So it was a really inspirational moment, and the opportunity was perfect to move into this role.
Oh, I love that. And I love that in so many different ways. Very specific experience within the energy sector, which I think is fantastic, but also on top of that, diversity of experience as well, both from that practical kind of hands-on sense, but also from the research and the qualifications you did as well. I think that blending is always so valuable. And I love the hands-on kind of experiential take on that too. So I think that's brilliant. And many congratulations. Thank you for sharing that personal story as well. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And I think as well, just with children generally, when I go into schools, etc., and if you kind of look at kind of young adults, etc., kind of Gen Z or Gen Z, they really are kind of purpose by design in so many different ways, looking at things like sustainability, and it's one of their biggest kind of criteria on who you might buy from or advocate or share about on social, whatever it might be, really are leading the charge there. So really interesting take it in many different ways. That's brilliant. And perhaps without further ado, we should drill into this topic of sustainability in a bit more detail as well, because I know we're going to have so many questions we could go into on this. It's a real pick and mix. So let's drill into maybe what's been changing the most. And you said it yourself about like the last 2 years. So many things have happened, different vectors of change, and also around risk, whether that's geopolitical or security or changing expectations and behaviors as well. So many different things. So from your take, whether it's a what or a who even, or indicators of change occurring, what are you seeing as those biggest drivers, the biggest changes you're seeing around this field?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Sally. There's a number of different actors, but it's becoming a very common theme in terms of what is driving sustainability. The first one I'd call out actually is investors and just in general, the investment community. I think they've been at the forefront of driving the agenda. I read a stat actually is from Gartner where they said 85% of all investors now factor in ESG performance as part of making a decision in terms of which organizations they're going to invest in. And I think that is starting to materialize. There are a number of organizations where we've seen investors over the last couple of years move away from because they classify them as high risk investments. So I think the first thing is the investors are driving the agenda, and alongside them, almost in parallel, is regulation. So a number of governments around the world have set their own net zero targets, and they see that as critical as part of their overall growth strategy from an economic perspective. So there's some emerging regulations coming out, definitely in the EU and the UK, but we're not too far off from seeing something also emerging in the US. Specifically within the EU, we've got the CSRD coming in, which will impact nearly 50,000 companies, and it's not just aimed at those who are registered in Europe and trading there. It's also subsidiary, so you could be located anywhere around the world, but if you do business in Europe, then you'll also be impacted. And there's some pretty big chunky requirements that they've set out in terms of demonstrating to shareholders, to consumers, and even to them in terms of how you're performing on particularly climate change and what actions you're taking. So that's an example in Europe. The SEC, the Security Exchange Committee, are also looking at introducing their own regulations. We expect to see some form of initial guidance around spring to summertime this year. So a lot of companies are going to be impacted. Regulation is going to drive more action. But I think the most important one, aside from those, we're seeing some impact as a result of those taking action, is actually consumers. Really good stat, I've seen through PwC, where around more than 80% of consumers are looking to buy sustainable products and looking to do business with companies with ESG that runs through the heart of the organization. And ultimately, that's what fuels the top line, right? So if organizations want to grow, they need to make sure that they're catering for their customers.
So true. You mentioned so many good examples there as well. And there's some work I'd also recommend people to check out by Refinitiv. And they've done an analysis, I think it's about 12,500 organizations, and kind of compared some of their work around ESG metrics as well, and kind of made it very granular in terms of comparison. So I'm sure we'll come back to that later on the measurement point, but I think you're absolutely spot on. Whether it's consumer take or an employee or potential customers in the future, also our ecosystem partners as well, that move from changing expectations around ESG to behavioral action that results from it, I think is so significant. It's that kind of quest for, not just transparency, but commitment and accountability around it too. So really interesting times, and very positive drivers of change, and also some of those challenges we mentioned as well. So really interesting. And so maybe now thinking about that, how addressing some of these needs, I thought maybe a lovely starting point is to kind of look at what your active listening, basically, about what your customers at BT Group are saying, what your employees, what your partners are looking for around this opportunity, but also the challenges where they're looking for support as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tackle each one of those separately. Starting with customers, they're looking for two things really from BT. The first one is BT being a responsible and sustainable supplier. That's a key thing, and that's part of the process when it comes to things like RFPs and RFIs, and even maintaining a long-term relationship with the organizations. They're starting to ask these very important questions. And the second thing is, how can you help me, BT, accelerate my own sustainability journey? So it's really that shared learning aspect, and how can we work together almost in partnership to drive societal benefits. So that's from the customer lens, the two key things they're looking for. Now, the employee one is really interesting. Actually, I think it was, in fact, this week, KPMG released some survey results which showed, I think it was around 1 in 3 Gen Z candidates for new roles were declining jobs based on them not feeling that the organization they'd applied for a role with had a strong ESG motive behind it. And I think that's really true, because I feel employees want to feel empowered. They want to feel like they're making a difference for the companies they're working for, and they're ultimately looking for a purpose-led organization. So it's similar to what we're seeing in terms of expectations from our customers, but also from potential employees' talent. I mean, the war for talent at the moment is really hot. So taking care of sustainability, being hot on the topic of ESG is going to be really important going forward from the employee side. And then finally, from a partner's perspective, just going back to that point of shared learning, I think partners are really looking to BT for leadership, but the opportunity for collaboration. So, how do we come together to work on products or propositions or new services that can have an overall benefit to society? But I guess even from a commercial perspective, how coming together can we create new sustainable business models that helps to fuel growth for them and for BT?
Absolutely. It's kind of what I phrased together as the rise of shared value business. And I think the resonance around that, and in so many different areas, just take another vector of change, like with the energy crisis, combined with supply chain fragility and the war in Ukraine as well. What we've seen there, again, it's moved the dialogue into a different place where people are looking at their consumption around their IT infrastructure and saying, actually, do you know what? This is better for our efficiency. It's better, again, with certain automation in this, it can free up time for more meaningful activities across that human machine partnership area, but equally it can be good for society, reuse of tech kit and things as well. So many different areas right across the life cycle, but that shared value resonance is, I've never seen it so high. So it's super interesting. And also supporting people around having agency to contribute to this as well. I always think that's one of the biggest things. People want to do the right thing, and it can be difficult, and it's a messy, challenging problem. And one very tangible example, an organisation I've been working with, we've been helping to rewrite CVs. So some of the points of reference around a role, linking them into sustainability, vision, mission, and targets, etc., that are role specific, kind of showing how every component part or every role can contribute to this as well. So embedding that from the design of even CVs for onboarding, we thought was one way of tackling that a little bit differently. So super interesting. Absolutely.
That's a great example.
Thank you, thank you. And kind of the by design element around ESG and sustainability, so I'll say that again. And the by design element of sustainability, but also other areas of ESG as well. For me, that's right up there. So we have to bake in these considerations. And I think that's, again, is really interesting. And maybe looking back a few years ago, for certain people like ourselves, with that long history in this type of area, it's something we've been looking at actively. But I think maybe in more mainstream business activities, it's been a little bit over there or a bit periphery. Now we've got this move to truly embed it in all aspects, and it's that connectiveness, isn't it? That agility, but also the visibility integration to really deliver on this as well. So maybe supporting this and looking at by design. What are you doing at BT specifically to kind of enable this from the roots up, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'll go back to our purpose to connect for good, and
Yes.
to support that, our plan. We launched a plan in December 2021 called the BT Manifesto, and the manifesto outlined three pillars to help drive growth. That is focused on inclusivity, responsibility, and sustainability. Now, under the inclusive pillar, that's all about ensuring we create a inclusive and diverse future. And the second one is around ensuring tech is for good, and the final one is minimizing our impact on the environment. Now, we've taken those three pillars, and we've looked at, as we develop new products, new propositions, new services, what are the key underlying metrics that we can bring in from each one of those pillars as part of the process for the product managers or the proposition managers to embed into what they're developing. And we've put together something called a sustainability scorecard. And the sustainability scorecard, it's a really intuitive tool. Actually, it asks the product or the proposition manager some aspects around each one of those pillars. How does this particular service contribute towards the manifesto? And then it provides them with an output that basically says, here's some areas where you can potentially improve on. So the idea behind this is, when customers buy these products from BT and services, they're safe in the knowledge that actually sustainability has been baked in from the start. So it positively contributes towards their own sustainability ambitions and their own sustainability goals.
Superb. That's really, really interesting. I think it also brings to the fore the pivotal role, really, of the ICT industry, but specifically within that, the role of telecoms as the catalyst. And I've got a book that will be coming out, and I've kind of got a bit of a tagline underneath it about spreading contagion of positive change. And I wanted to reclaim that word, really. If you think about the pandemic and how that word was quite a negative one, actually, what we have seen from that is the power of coming together. And it reminded me of that as you were speaking there as well. So, yeah, absolutely, we can create that benefit, but particularly in the two sectors I've mentioned and the intertwining, the ripple effect of getting this right and enabling others, from customers to ecosystem partners, to make a difference and reduce consumption and various other different elements of this too. It's really clear to see. So that's very interesting too. And again, in the show notes, there's some specific stats on that as well that shows just how much of an impact we can make here over time. So we'll pop those in the show notes as well, so people can see in real practical examples of the impact that can achieve. So brilliant stuff. And thank you as well, kind of, for setting the scene there around some of your initiatives, starting with the manifesto. I love the scorecard example. Again, I think great for getting that buy-in as well around different areas of the organisation and kind of benchmarking progress along the way, which I think is so helpful. And perhaps we can go on to your breaking news as well. Very, very recent, and this has been fantastically part of this. So 2 new tools that BT Group have been launching, one around the carbon network dashboard, the second around the digital carbon calculator. Really, really useful, drilling into some of the needs we've already mentioned around measurement and reduction of Scope 3 in particular. Perhaps we can give a high-level overview of both, if that would be okay, and how they're supporting people. And from a personal point of view, going back to, I know, a shared interest we have and a real passion for accessibility and inclusion too. I love how that calculator feature is accessible to everyone too. So really, really, really important step forward, I think, that.
Yes, absolutely, and really the premise of both tools were based on feedback we had directly from customers in terms of the biggest challenge they faced in terms of getting to net zero, and really where most organizations are today on that journey is, how do I collect good quality data that helps to underpin my target? So if they've set a net zero target for target for a particular year, they need to be able to collect that data in terms of their wider supply chain, and then use that as a way of baselining their overall emissions. Now, that's easier said than done, particularly if you look at organizations where they have thousands of suppliers dotted all over the world of different sizes. So when organizations come to BT, they want to understand what is the impact of the products and services that they're buying from us, and how does that contribute towards their Scope 3 emissions. So the digital carbon calculator, the first tool that you mentioned, looks at the customer inventory BT in terms of specific services and devices, and it overlays the carbon footprint for those and provides an estimated profile for that customer in terms of the carbon emissions. And the customers can use that data in a number of ways. Some of them are using it as part of developing that baseline that I mentioned. Others are actually using it to identify carbon hotspots within their ICT environment. That tool is accessible for BT customers, but it's also accessible to non-BT customers. In the case of BT customers, we actually have the ability to scan the customer inventory and provide that data as standard. For non-BT customers, they're able to access the tool and upload their own inventory. And it's as simple as that, really. They upload their own inventory, and then we're able to provide an estimated carbon footprint based on what they upload. And then moving on to the carbon network dashboard, this one is much more granular. This is aimed at organizations who are much further in their journey, and they're looking at the optimization piece. So they've kind of got to grips with the measurement aspect, but they're looking at, what can they potentially tweak in the networking environment that can give them their sustainability gains. And many of them are bridging energy and net zero together in this instance, and the carbon network dashboard is a tool that enables them to do that. So it extracts real-time power data from the devices within the network. I think we pull for around 12 times per hour. We then overlay the real-time energy information from the grid at a country level and bring them together. And what that enables organizations to do is get a much more granular insight into the carbon intensity as it varies throughout the day. And alongside that, organizations can also start planning for the way they run their networks, the way they manage the workloads and applications. So we've heard some CIOs, CTOs say they'd like to leverage this tool to decide where and when they run their workloads and applications to match when there's a high proportion of renewable electricity on the grid. And that is a real opportunity to drive and accelerate towards net zero for these organizations. But before these tools existed, it's very hard to get visibility of your networking environment and what is happening on the energy grid. So effectively, we're just bringing this together for our customers and making it really easy for them to accelerate their journey to net zero from a networking perspective.
I love that. And thank you for immediately sharing that example as well, because I was going to come on to that, because I always think it makes it really tangible when you show how that makes a difference and put that in action. So that's brilliant. And I love there as well how you were probably mentioning three of the top trends of certainly early 2023, really, in many ways, in terms of that reduction of complexity. The quest to integrate, particularly with things like IT and OT convergence as well. Embedding sustainability by design, obviously, as part of our theme today as well, but also the need for visibility. It's absolutely key, whether we're talking around inclusion of all emissions, so scope 1 to 3, and also ensuring those are inclusive and external sources of data as well, because I've noticed that's coming out as a bit of a kind of gap area too. And certainly, again, we'll put this in the show notes as well. Boston Consulting Group have got a really interesting data set around this, showing kind of the intention gap, action gap in many ways, around wanting to do more, introducing measurement, but maybe it's not looking at all the different areas of your estate. So what you're doing there, I think, is tackling that head on, and also making it more easy to compare and be consistent around the measurement too, which again, I think is really helpful for people to make informed decisions, whether you're internally in the organization looking to optimize or whether it's external and it's part of your tender evaluation process even. It's really interesting. So fantastic to see that. Thank you so much. And I'd love to go back to that theme of enabling kind of connectivity for good, really, in many different ways. It's very much your vision. And one thing I wanted to highlight, I was super impressed by this. That's that bringing together, and you mentioned it in your own background as well, of research and education, of application, and of knowledge sharing around this as well. I mean, you had a great report that's come out recently as well that's really drilled into this and looking, for example, about changing roles of CIO and how they can bring together impacts for sustainability and digitalization. But also, I love the fact this has been recognized as well. So, for example, perhaps you could share about the Corporate Knights Award as well, because I love the fact that it's recognizing sustainable companies right across the world, but the measurement of that is so transparent as well. I think that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Corporate Knights run the awards on an annual basis, and I think they announce the top corporations at Davos. So Davos has just passed us a few weeks ago, and we feel extremely proud as BT to be recognised as being in the top 25 most sustainable corporations in the world, according to Corporate Knights, and that's based on a number of different factors. Actually, it's the broader ESG consideration. So it's not just the work we're doing on the climate side, but also the work we're doing with regards to diversity and inclusion, modern slavery, and human rights. So I think that gives visibility, particularly to our customers, in terms of we're not marking our own homework. Other people are giving us the recognition, and when they're procuring from or looking for a responsible supplier, then we've got that accreditation to back up the work that we're doing. So Corporate Knights is a great example. Another one I'd like to call out, if that's okay, Sally, is CDP. So we've been CDP rated 7 years. We've been A rated on CDP 7 years in a row, and that's a fantastic achievement. And again, there's thousands of companies around the world who report into CDP and are benchmarked, and we're in the top 2% globally for CDP. And in fact, many of our customers actually request data from CDP in terms of how BT is performing on climate, and we make that accessible as part of the supply chain leadership module. So it's a really, really important accreditation, and they've created a standardized framework that allows the information to be shared both across our supply chain and for our customers as well.
That's fantastic on so many different levels. I love the fact that your customers and partners are asking for this, and they want that transparency. They want to be able to drill into that data and see how it's put together. And that's fantastic from a heightened awareness point of view. I think that's really, really interesting. But also the fact, as you were saying, 7 years in a row, it says everything in terms of having a deeply held commitment for action in this area. That's super, super important. So congratulations on that. And I think it's a real testament for the team around these types of activities as well. It really does mean such a lot. And part of that kind of team theme in many ways is also the power of collective. I don't know about yourself, but certainly for me, I think with the pandemic, if you reflect about what we've experienced over this period of time, it's that power of coming together. We've seen the art of the possible. We've seen acceleration and innovation curves really broken down, whether that's kind of the move to work from home very, very rapidly, which has obviously had its various evolutions since, but also other areas as well in terms of changing expectations and behaviours. But as part of that kind of open data sharing, the co-creativity and the collectiveness. So HPC Consortium, one really practical example of that, some of the biggest tech companies in the world, but also, individual citizen scientists, education establishments, governments, different sectors, different verticals, doing this knowledge transfer in a safe, open way. And in this case, it was healthcare, shattering innovation curves around the vaccine. Let's apply that approach, as a mindset, but also in practical actions to things around ESG too. So I just wanted to mention that because I'm thinking about something I read about yourself in terms of voluntary positions. So like myself, I know we both love mentoring, and I really was struck by a piece talking about your role as a Digital Boost mentor, and particularly looking at SMEs, because again, I think it's important to look at potential differences, affecting SMEs and SMBs through to enterprise. So I wonder if you could tell me more about what you're doing there, and also some insights that you might have got from that process.
Yes, absolutely. As you say, the program is completely voluntary. I've been doing it for a couple of years, and the most important thing is really helping those organizations to set a strategy which is future fit and centers around ESG. And for these organizations, it's not that easy to do because they can't afford to have the specialist resources looking at this. I mean, I feel very privileged to be able to support them as part of the journey, and seeing many of them implement some of these strategies. But if I think about the difference between what I see on the multinational corporate side and where they're heading with their sustainability journey, and predominantly it's driven, as I mentioned earlier, by the investment community and the regulators. On the SME side, it's not like that at all. It's really a voluntary approach to sustainability. There is no regulations in place yet for SMEs, so they need to figure out their own strategy. They need to build their own tools to kind of succeed in this space. And for them, it's all about differentiation. And the message I try to get across to a lot of these startups is that actually this is an opportunity. Many organizations at the moment are having to set out diversity and inclusion targets within their supply chain, and they will allocate a percentage to procurement from SMEs. Local and diverse suppliers as well form part of that, and that also extends in the UK through to the public sector. So there's an opportunity to participate in a lot of the frameworks and RFP processes, particularly if you're an SME, and potentially winning the space if you're able to demonstrate that you are a sustainable supplier. So that's one aspect to it. There's lots of opportunities emerging, and then beyond that. I referred to competitiveness, and if I just think about the hospitality industry, particularly in where I live in London, I'm starting to see a number of restaurants really bring in their sustainability story to for their customers. Lots of farm to table concepts now emerging, and they really want to tell that story of how they supporting local farmers and other local initiatives as part of their wider supply chain. So many of them actually see themselves tailoring their service for the future customers. And again, it goes back to that Gen Z point that we touched on so many times throughout this conversation. So yeah, I definitely think that sustainability should be seen as an opportunity for SME, and they don't need to wait for the regulatory aspects. It should be self-driven.
Absolutely. It's kind of sustainability at any size. So similar to my narrative about security and support available for all types of organizations. I think you're absolutely spot on. And kind of that changing that narrative as
Yeah,
sustainability as opportunity, I think is absolutely huge. And particularly for burgeoning SMEs where they really can, embed things by design and get this right. Like we see in fintech around
yeah,
financial inclusion offers, for
yeah.
example, the speed of innovation there has really delivered results. So actually using that agility, it's not always about lack of resource. It's actually about the speed to innovate, and being really on point and aligned, as you were saying, like with Gen Z, Gen Z too. So really interesting opportunities there. And I know we already mentioned this a little bit because it came up so naturally, but have you got any other examples as well about this power of partnership? We've spoken about it a little bit already, and also from the voluntary sector, as you were saying there, with mentoring and also with NGOs, etc. too, but maybe more from an enterprise level or enterprise and say burgeoning startup. What have you seen there? Maybe organizations traditionally that would have competed coming together. Are you seeing more creativity to really, tackle together and kind of go further faster by that type of approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think sustainability kind of inspires what would have been a naturally competitive area for many organizations to actually come together for common good. And I mean, even just within BT, if I think back to the great work we're doing on the collaboration aspect and bringing the best of the startup world into the corporate world, we launched the Green Tech Innovation Platform. I think it was in 2020, and we set out an objective to onboard startups who could help us with supporting our public sector customers on their sustainability journey. And specifically as part of that program, I think we went through around 45 startups from memory, and we selected two that have made it through to the final round, and now we're working with them within BT to co-develop propositions that we're taking out to our public sector customers. So the first one, IOPT, we're working with them to deploy sensors, IoT sensors that pick up everything from temperature, humidity, air quality in social housing. And the benefit associated with that from a sustainability perspective is first and foremost the tenant health. When there's things such as damp, mold, etc., emerging, or even ensuring fuel poverty, that they have heating on and protecting the most vulnerable. So there's an aspect of that, but there's also the collaboration around the big data piece and bringing all of that data in to prevent engineer rollouts, when there's a fault that could be resolved remotely. And so that's through the work we're doing with an organization called IOPT, as I say. And the second company we're working with is called Ever Impact, and we're deploying air quality sensors into our street hubs. So you may have seen the BT street hubs dotted around your local city, and you can connect to Wi-Fi there, you can make calls, etc. But within the infrastructure, we're deploying the Ever Impact sensors, and we're collecting that data, and we're passing that back to the local authorities, and they use that data in helping them make some informed decisions, whether that's around planning routes for low congestion, better air quality, or long-term actually providing that data back to their own citizens and enabling them to make the decisions in terms of whether they want to go out running, for example, when there's high air pollution in the environment. So that's two examples of how we're collaborating with two startups that traditionally you may not expect the telco world to have partnered with.
That's a great example. It really underpins, I think, something I mentioned earlier, that connectivity really is. It's the overriding pillar of so many. If you look at the SDGs, Will, in many ways, it really is the crux, whether we're talking about, inclusion and the aspects we've talked about today in terms of climate. But so many of those challenges are interrelated. You can group most of them into, say, 5 or 6, can't you? And it really shows, a bit like the WEF report that came out again just a couple of weeks ago. We're tackling with polycrisis here in so many different ways. So to attack that and redress that balance, so to speak, we need a poly approach as well in terms of people coming together. And I think what you've done there in terms of power partnerships is a really, really interesting one. So great. And we'll definitely share about those startup partnerships too. I think it's a really great example. Exciting. Thank you. And kind of leading on from that as well, there's another stat that I was looking at in terms of some research. This one was from Accenture, and it was showing, a bit like we talked about earlier about this value proposition, it was showing that organizations that had invested in ESG issues fairly early on, so maybe just before the start of the pandemic, is around 2.6 times more value is coming out in terms of outperformance of peers. Did that surprise you? Did you expect that? And where do you think we're going with that?
Yeah, really, really great question. I think this is the shared values piece again, actually, and interestingly, we've seen kind of the shift of the narrative from CSR, the corporate social responsibility agenda, more towards having a positive impact, measurable impact, in fact, on the social aspects and the environmental aspects. And interestingly, you mentioned the pandemic there. I think a study that I've seen shows that ESG stocks, or the ones that embedded ESG into their kind of into the heart of the business operations, actually were resilient over COVID, and were the ones that grew over the same period. So there's definitely a link in terms of financial performance and those who have built ESG into the core of their business operations. And and my guess is really based on what I'm seeing since the pandemic, that trend is here to stay. And the way I look at it actually is it's about mitigating risks. Ultimately, if you're baking in those different aspects from ESG, you're minimizing your corporate risk, and therefore you should be seen as being future fit. and those are the stocks or the organizations that investors will want to back, and as well as that, even consumers will want to buy from. So it definitely has a financial performance impact.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, funnily enough, I drilled into some data. So with a financial services organization, I was able to get access and do a bit of because I had a proposition, pretty much exactly what you said, that, could we actually prove and not just assume this is the case, but could we
Yeah.
assume that companies kind of would do well by doing good, for want of a better way of
Mm.
phrasing it? And just from that, individual research as well, it was absolutely echoing that pretty much across the board, not just in a particular vertical or something like that. It really is showing that. And I also think embedding these types of considerations, particularly their interrelatedness, also puts these organizations not from a resiliency point of view, but also like an ambidexterity point of view as well. So with all these different vectors of risk, of changes, etc., if you're embedding these right types of foundations across ESG type measures, you're actually putting yourself in the right position across culture, across process, across tech, across change management and skills uplift, etc., to be able to navigate those types of changes, and for your staff and customers as well to feel more confident and agile to that type of change too. So it really is, again, another shared value type of proposition that's super interesting. And I think we've just about got time for a couple of bonus questions, if I may. That would be fantastic. And I wanted to bring out some more around, Tech for Good has kind of imbued our conversation today, but I wonder if we could share a little bit more around that, because I know we have a massive shared passion here around scaling Tech for Good, and also aspects that support that, like inclusive, purposeful leadership as well. So I wondered if we could take a moment, maybe to share, some stories or a project, or people that you've seen and you're really proud of and have made a difference. I think that's so important, that visibility, and encourage other people to say, hey, do you know what, we could do that, or I could do that, we could be part of that change too.
Really great question, Sally, and absolutely, I think we're both aligned on the shared values on this one. One program I'd like to call out is BT Fast Futures. And this is aimed at 18 to 24-year-olds and giving them the right skills to succeed in terms of whatever career they choose to go into. Now, just looking at some of the key stats that I have in front of me in terms of how this is demonstrating the Tech for Good and the work we're doing as part of the broader ESG agenda. 64% of all participants from there are from an ethnic diverse background. 65% are female, 63% are from low socioeconomic status, and 7% have learning disabilities. This, for me, this is something I'm really proud of in terms of BT really supporting the future and being fully inclusive. It goes back to the first pillar of the manifesto. So for me, that is something I also take on board personally and look for similar opportunities. And particularly when I do my own mentoring for the SMEs, I'm always looking for opportunities to support those from the ethnic diverse background in particular, just coming from my own background, but also trying to promote some of the other aspects that I just talked about there.
Oh, fantastic. We'll definitely share those stories as well. I think that's fantastic, because again, when I do mentoring, one of the things that I've got this phrase that keeps coming up about click to commit. And one of the things I've seen is that, particularly if you haven't, say, for example, got a particularly strong tech background, I've seen people, like, for example, there's a lot of cloud skills training, some of it which is completely free to access now. And I had a chat about this very recently, and there was this hesitation about, well, but I haven't got this and I haven't done that.
Yes.
And will it be okay? And will I get support with that? Or don't I need to have done? And it was this hesitation. So the visibility that, all these different, it's not a linear path into a particular role, whether it's tech or anything else, particularly today. And actually, do you know what? Not having that doesn't matter if you've got that right attitude and mindset to learn new things. Most other things can be taught, if you know what I mean, and facilitated. But that kind of curiosity and passion to learn, I think sharing those stories of people who've gone through these types of programs can make such a difference. It really is. And I'll give a very quick shout out to around, because I love the fact you picked out so many different areas of diversity as well. I think that's so important. And one I'll mention as well is about neurodiversity, because again, I think that's one that sometimes is underexplored. And there's an amazing program called Dandelion, or the Dandelion program. So again, we'll pop some notes into the show notes around that one too, because it's just come to the UK relatively recently, and I've seen some really great things there. Again, kind of working together, and such a positive program and great outcomes. So that's brilliant to see. So Thank you so much for sharing
Fantastic.
that, Sarwar. It's brilliant. And finally, if I may as well, I have a little series. So the audience, I think, will have heard me mention this a few times before, but it's a major passion because I think when we look at changing the narrative, to use that phrase again, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, frankly, in tech and other areas as well, we need to be really visible and show people from the broadest diversity of backgrounds, say, hey, help people say, think this could be me. See someone that relates, whether that's from an experience point of view, a background, an age, whatever it might be, but it can help you think about things differently and be less afraid to reach out even as well and go for support and click to commit, as I mentioned earlier. So the 365 series, I called it that, kind of to show that, focus days are important. So as just one example, Girls in ICT Day, but we need to make sure we have that momentum kind of rolling every single day of the year. So I wonder if we could share maybe some recommendations, whether you're a young person at the moment, a teen or primary school, or an older adult, say looking to reskill or upskill right now. What would be your how or your why even about coming into tech or exploring that, or even just exploring new technologies and feeling more confident with using them too? It doesn't just have to be about the career.
Yeah, really, really good question. The first thing, regardless of whether you're starting off your career or whether you're looking to reskill, is you've got to follow your passion.
Yes.
And I think you've really got to have a love for technology and be inspired by the impact of technology. And if you are, then that's definitely the route to go down. So I guess for those who are looking to start their career, my advice would be look for opportunities for practical experience. Nothing can beat that. And traditionally, we always think about universities and degree and so on, which is fantastic. That's probably what we refer to as the more recognized route today. But actually, I see a really big role for apprenticeships and the value that apprenticeships bring, getting that hands-on practical experience, spending a few years in a role working for a company, but at the same time learning on the side as well. And I really recommend for those who are interested in a technology career to look at both avenues, whether that's following the university degree route or looking at a apprenticeship. Just try and find an opportunity to get hands-on and gain that practical experience. And just thinking back to what I said at the beginning of the conversation, the biggest value for me was to spend 6 months in a coal-fired power station doing shifts from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. So nothing can beat that.
Absolutely.
For those who are looking to reskill, I think it's never too late. Technology actually moves at pace, and it's moving even faster now. And there's so many great problems to be solved. Climate change being one of them. And I think it's really just finding, where do you want to play a role? What are you really passionate about? And then it's setting out a personal development plan, really, being clear in terms of what's required to get into that role. Is there a specific skill set you need to have? Or is it more experience based? And can you get a mentor potentially who's from that particular area that you're interested in? And I think if you have that plan in place, it can help you succeed because you'll have some milestones that can be your guiding light effectively to get you to where you need to be. So yeah, my really big takeaway for those who are looking to reskill is please put a personal development plan in place. It's really important.
Absolutely. It's similar in a funny way, the analogy earlier with the scorecard that we were talking about,
Mm.
whether you're talking about kind of buy-in and getting other people involved and seeing the
Yeah.
progress and moving on, or whether it's an individual one, you can see your own personal milestones along the way. Absolutely agree with you. And I think a couple of other quick kind of points thinking about what you said, absolutely about the importance of mentorship, and equally kind of going beyond that to sponsorship as well. So for example, if you see someone, you think, you know what, they'd be a fantastic fit for
Yeah.
a keynote or a panel or a promotion, whatever it might be, or secondment even to get hands-on practical training, whatever that might be, but going that extra mile, because sometimes it's a confidence thing. And that's my other key point here as well. Help people be curious to continually learn. That learning for life, I think that phrase has never resonated more, to supporting people not just with skills access, but with the skills confidence to apply them as well. So I talk about STEAM a lot. So some of the arts type skills around emotional intelligence or EQ, but also problem solving, communications, etc., can help you navigate these changes and to reach out and communicate and to share these stories in the right type of way and get support when you need it. I think that's really important. And I'd also recommend people looking out for metacognition. I'm not particularly a gym person, but this is like gym for your brain, basically. It helps you kind of identify, we talk about smart tech, but it's like smart learning strategies, and helps you kind of understand, what, am I quite a linear learner? Am I more kinetic? Like I do that a lot when I'm doing keynotes, but we're all different. But you know what? They're all equally valuable. And I think sometimes traditional curriculums don't have enough space to be able to support that. It's very hard. We all know the challenges around that. So anything we can do to support that with free resources and training to help you understand that and find out what works for you, helps you to be a smarter learner alongside the smarter tech too. So again, gives you that confidence. So we'll put some assets around that too. So hopefully that might help one of our listeners and viewers today. It'd be great to be able to share that and do that.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're at the end of our time today, so it's been fantastic, and I would definitely love to revisit the conversation. And I think with the kind of the speed, the scope and the scale of changes we're seeing in this space, it's one to continually revisit and also share more of these impact stories along the way, because that's how we can come together. And that's the most important thing, I think, around SDG action, is that power of coming together and combining, technology change is a great enabler, but with support for people, the culture, the process, the change management, etc., that brings all these elements together. And of course, as per your 2 launches, support around the measurement of change in these areas as well, because again, that's how we can continually improve and innovate around this too, and create that shared value we've been talking about today.
Absolutely. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Sally.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you all for watching and listening today. And as I mentioned throughout, lots of examples in this episode, which I absolutely love. So we'll be sharing some of those also in places like LinkedIn and Twitter, etc. too. So you can bring some of those stories for life. And also links to the new announcements as well around the dashboard and calculator launches. So much information here, and also education as well. So we'll also share some of the skills resources too. And as I always say, all follow-up questions are really welcome. So thanks so much for your engagement and questions. We really do appreciate it. Thank you all. Thanks for listening to this episode of Tomorrow's Tech Today. If you enjoy what we're doing, please subscribe to us and leave a review. It really means a lot. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and see more behind the scenes video footage on YouTube. Thanks for listening.